Hello, hello, and welcome to today's Fall for Watercolor art class. Here, let's get a little face up here. Hello, I am so excited. Oh, I realized I forgot to turn the camera on. I'm so excited for today's lesson. We are going to be talking all about shading and shadow, which are two things that I got a lot of questions about. Also, still feeling kind of woozy. So if I am not making sense when I'm talking, please just let me know in the comments. Got that Dayquil, baby. Anyway, I am so excited to be talking about this, and I got bangs, so I had to show them off. Okay, enough of that. Let's get to today's topic. So we are doing the Fall for Watercolor Challenge. If you're new in town, check out the link in the description below, and that will give you all the details on how to sign up for the challenge. We've got some really great prizes. I've got like paints, paintbrushes, all kinds of fun stuff that we'll be doing the giveaway at the end of the month. I cannot wait. We've been having so many fun times in this live, and today is no exception. So we are going to be talking about shadows and shading and how to not only create the brush effects of shadows and shading, but also to talk about the color that we use to create the effect that we want. So I am super excited. Let's get into it. All right, here we go. So you can see I'm a little bit behind on my daily paintings here. So, oh, and if you're in the comments, let me know here. Welcome. Today's question will be, let's see, what should today's question be? What type of art do you first remember loving as a kid? That's a fun one. Okay. Awesome. So we have kind of two topics to cover. So the first part is we're going to talk about shading. So there are a couple of ways that we can go about shading. When we think of shading, we think of a soft transition from one color to another. So we have talked a little bit about the shading. Of course, I'm using my phthalo turquoise from Mayberry Blue. So we've talked about shading, where you start with color and then you keep adding water to soften that, and you create that smooth blend. Okay, so we've talked about that with the variegated wash and the gradient wash. But there are actually a couple ways that we can get this smooth transition. So imagine we are painting a petal. Let's just draw a little petal here. Hopefully this still has lead. And imagine it has like a really deep purple on the inside of the petal. And then it's going to fade, it's going to shade out to a lighter color. So let's, which makes sense. It's going to be like a little bit darker in the center. So what you can do is you can start by applying your paint, and then you're going to pull that paint outward by adding more and more water. So here I'm adding water in between, and I'm pulling that paint out. And so the color comes when I pull my paintbrush away from the paint. And by adding more water, we are gradually lightening this color. Okay. Next, we have, let's see. We are going to have a, we're going to create the same effect, but we're going to be doing it a little bit differently. So, oh, Tracy's here. She says simple animal drawings in elementary school was her jam. We used to watch videos on PBS. I love that. Okay. Yeah, I'm trying to think of what mine was. I really liked making friendship bracelets. Ooh, Rachel loves finger painting. Love it. Okay, so for the second one, we're going to create the same effect, but instead of pulling that color out, we're actually going to just paint this whole area with water, and then we're going to drop the color into this shape. So in this one, we started with the color. In this next one, we are going to add the color in second. So I don't know if you can tell, but this one's shiny and wet with water. And then I'm going to actually just drop that paint in. And you can see this makes a really cool, organic kind of flowy effect. All right. Paint just kind of cascaded in. And if I want to make this a little bit more gradual and less dramatic, I can totally do that. So let's kind of take a damp but mostly dry brush, and I am just coaxing the paint a little bit back into the paint side. I'm soaking up some of that pigment to create a smooth transition. I'm making sure to clean off the paint from my brush with my towel. I could also dip it in the water and then dry my brush off as well. And you can, while it's wet, always add more. So again, if we wanted more here, we could add it to the bottom. If you're like, this isn't enough, you could still kind of combine both of these techniques and allow that gentle, oh my gosh, do you see it just scooching on over there? So these are two ways that you can apply a really gentle, gradual shadow. So with this one, where we're starting with paint, there are a couple nuances to this. So I'm going to do like rectangles, I think. Okay. So when we are pulling that paint upward, this is going to give us a little bit more control. I don't know if you've ever tried to kind of scooch that paint out and it just gets all over the place. You're like, oh, where's it going? And it seems really uncontrollable. So usually when that happens, so let's get a nice like juicy layer here. And if you're wanting to like dig more into this, the video for the spring florals tutorial on like the ranunculus really get into this a lot. Okay, so if I go in and I directly go right along the line here, that color is going to spread really intensely. So I'm taking my paintbrush and I am gradually adding water, and the tip of my paintbrush is connecting where the water line is from the previous brush stroke. But you can see the paint's moving around quite a bit. I'm using a lot of water. And it's a pretty nice transition, but I don't feel like I have a ton of control over it. So in this case, I'm going to actually meet this at the end. So I'm going to meet this paint at the end of this transition. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to paint the rest of the shape with water. And I'm going to come smooch this line at the very last minute. And here I know how much water I have on both sides of this equation. And then I'm just tickling that line. And that's where we get that really cool organic flow. And I like how this, it lets the water do the talking. It lets the paint really go in a more natural way. Whereas this one, I'm really manipulating the transition a lot, and there's a lot of water. I can always go back in and kind of fuss with it to make it a little bit more even. But especially when I'm doing flowers and things like that, I love to let the water do the work for me. Okay. So we've talked a lot about wet and wet. Another piece of shading is we can actually do a lot of dry work here. So if you don't want to have the whole petal wet, like honestly, this is like a lazy girl hack. My water is pretty dirty, so I don't want to use a ton of my water on here because it will, you can't really see it from the camera, I don't think, but it is kind of yellow and gross color. So instead of getting that whole leaf wet and adding more stress to your paper, we're actually going to just fade this out with a dry brush. So same kind of idea. I've put my paint down. I'm cleaning my brush off in my water. I'm drying my brush off in my towel. Okay, and we are going to imagine that we are like tickling a little chandelier. Okay, so with our feather duster. Okay, so very gentle, very gradual, very light, and just like such a weird reference, but clean, like you're dusting your chandelier. That's the word I was looking for. Dusting, but we could tickle it too. I mean, you do you. Um, so you can see here, this dry, mostly dry brush is allowing me to push the paint around and not create a lot of watermarks. And so I want to keep cleaning it so that I'm coming in. Oh, you see this has a little bit too much water. See when I drop my pen or my paintbrush, it kind of makes those little lighter spots. So I'm going to dry my brush off further. And I'm going to just gently, so gently feather this cutie out. Okay. And this is going to create a really controlled blend. So if you're wanting something that's really, really smooth and not a lot of this water texture, dry brushing is going to be the way to go. So if you see like those botanical paintings that are like so realistic. Oh gosh, sorry, that stupid line is there today. No. Let me see if I can move that line. I'm sorry. Oh, no. Nope. Let's try that. Nope. There we go. Okay. So if you look at botanical drawings where they're usually they're used like for science to really capture what the intricacies of that species are, they are going to use a lot of dry brushing. Like almost everything is just very, very teeny tiny like this, like so gentle, so delicate. But let's take a little moment. Okay, so we've got Rachel, who loves finger painting when she was a kid. Melinda Solfrank loves coloring with new crayons. Ah, yes. And then Brittany, coloring with markers. Oh my gosh, so fun. And so botanical artists will like build up these layers with tons and tons of teeny tiny dry brush strokes. And I'm not going to do this too much, though it is like oddly satisfying. But if you can see the difference, here we're seeing the granulation of this paint. We're seeing the texture of the paper. We're seeing some hard dry lines where the water distributed. Here we've got a really nice organic kind of flow, and it feels really gentle and ephemeral and delicate. So this is where we just pulled the color up. This one is where we met the color in the middle, just had a kiss at the last minute. This one is where we took a dry brush and from the wet paint and just coaxed it upwards by drying and cleaning our brush in between. And then this is just starting with dry, really dry paint, not totally dry, but just very light, gentle layer application. So it really just depends on what effect you're trying to get. I would say that this one is probably my favorite. And then for more specificity, I will use this. I find that this one doesn't leave enough of a watercolor whimsy. And so I don't tend to do that unless I'm doing some really like intricate details, maybe like eyeballs if I'm doing a portrait. Okay. So that's where we are with that. And that is shading. Let me check my notes and make sure that I got everything. Oh, another thing you can do is a glaze. Okay, Brittany says, yes, love the specific look of watercolor. Totally. So let's say we want to add a little bit more shadow and shading to this one. This one's mostly dry. What you can do with the glaze is also just add a second layer, okay? So you can do any of these techniques over here. I'm going to pull it out using a damp brush. It's kind of a combination of these two techniques. And honestly, I don't like think about it as concretely as like, I'm using this technique. It's just kind of like whatever feels right in the moment. But I know it can be helpful to kind of have some tools in your toolbox to think about when you're approaching a painting. I think at this point, I'm kind of like, oh, this one just feels right in my hand. And I think that's just something that comes with practice. So you'll see that this one is a little bit darker now. And again, since it's wet, you can add more pigment and deepen that look. Okay. So then shadow. So you can use this for shading when you're going from one color to another, when there's a color that's lightening and darkening. So like a petal, it has this soft transition of color in it. But sometimes we'll use this technique for shadows too. So when you think of maybe like a terracotta pot or something, oh my God, what even is this color? My palette is so messy. So let's say we have a pot here, a little terracotta pot. Okay, it's not going to be fancy here, but we can use all of these techniques to create a soft transition to show the shape of the object, right? It's not going to be all flat. There's going to be some more color over here. So I'm going to drop in this color into our wet area and add a little bit more color on this side. Oh my God, this is so goopy. Okay. I've been making a mess of my palettes. Oh gosh, it would help if you could see it, huh? Sorry, friends. Okay, so what I've done is I've created a wet space here, and we're using the wet and wet technique to create kind of a shadow along the side of this terracotta pot. And I'm just coaxing out the color into the middle. I can even use the lifting technique that we talked about yesterday with our apple to lighten this side up if I wanted. And that's an example of shading for shadow, because we know in our head that this whole terracotta pot is the same color mostly, right? So there's like, I don't know if it's dirty or something. But to depict the depth of this object, we create that with some shadow. So we kind of are imagining that our sun is hitting it here, and this is the dark side. And we might even go so far as in to add in an even darker color here to indicate that shadow. Okay. So shadows can be soft like this with the blending that we've done, or shadows could be really firm, like a very specific outline of where the shadow is. And this would be where the sun is really directly hitting that thing. So let's say this is actually a pot with a lip. Okay, so let's make that little lip. It's going to be a little wonky, but that's okay. We'll make it work. Okay. So if you can imagine, if the sun is coming from this direction, if the sun is coming from this direction, under this lip here, there's going to be a dark line. And unlike this rounded shadow that's indicating like the shape, this dark line is going to be much more defined, much more of a hard line. So as we're thinking about when we're applying shadow for these hard line shadows, we're going to want to make sure that this shape is dry so that it doesn't bleed into the rest. Okay? So I'm going to go ahead and do my blow dryer. So I'm just going to mute my mic while I do that so I don't hurt your ears. Okie dokie. So this should be dry for the most part. And to create the shadow, I'm going to just use my indigo because it's a nice dark color. And this shadow, I feel like sometimes I get the scariest when adding these really harsh shadows, but I promise you, this is going to be what gives your painting the zing a zing zing. Okay, so this is intense. All right. Just doing a little line. And I know because the sun is cutting here and then we're coming along the back, this is actually going to make more of like a pizza shape, like that. And then I might add even a little bit of this harsher shadow, like right here. And I know it's going to come out here onto the ground. So we just went from like a weird kind of trapezoidy shape to something that like really has a lot of depth. Okay, so we added, oh, and I didn't even explain here. So I added a really dark line and then I met it with water. And that allows this really nice cascade that I love to do for cast shadows. And like shadows that are like cast onto the surface. And I like that it's just really delicate. So we used all three techniques here. We used the wet and wet technique where we added a soft shadow to show the curvature of the pot. We even used the lifting technique, which was super fun, to lighten this part up. We then waited for our painting to dry with the help of our heat gun. And then we used a really dark line here to indicate the harsh shadow of that lip of the pot. And then we added in a ground shadow where we did a harsh line, but then we softened it out by meeting it with a line of water over the shape that we wanted to create that shadow with. So I made sure that the area that was wet was the area where I wanted that shadow paint to cascade in. So I didn't add any wetness over here because I didn't want the shadow to go all the way there. By creating that water barrier where I wanted the shadow to spread into with water first, it allows the paint to cascade into the area that I want it to. All right. So now we've talked a lot about the brush techniques and the way to achieve the look of the brush, but we haven't talked too much about shadow. Color, sorry. So there are a couple different ways. I can kind of like leave this out here so you can see. There are a couple different ways to add shadow to an item. So we're going to create like some, let's do some, I'm just feeling this like red, pink here. Let's do some balls, okay? So the first technique is actually, we're going to paint just a flat color. I find that this is really approachable because you can get your shapes down first. So we're just doing a nice flat wash. You can get your shapes down first, and then you add the shadow in later. So what we would do is we would take our, I'm going to take my blow dryer and make sure that this is dry before I dig into the shadow. Okay. So I'm going to do that. Hold on. I need a sip of coffee. Okay. All right. So let me mute that so we can do Okay, so this is, well, mostly dry. Hold on. All right, we're good. So what we're going to do to this circle is we are going to add the same color to our shadow. Okay, so again, we're going to just imagine our light source is coming from here. I don't know why, that's kind of my go-to. So I'm going to add the same color. So this is like a glaze, right? And I'm going to soften that edge out using a dry brush. I'm going to kind of pull that color across my little ball gently with just like a lightly damp brush. And there's my ball shape. Okay, so it deepens the color of the ball. I add a little bit more darkness right here. It gives that round vibe. But in this case, and I think this gives the shape of the ball. Okay, now I'm fussing, but you get the idea, right? I think it gives the shape of the ball, but if I were to add this color as like the ground shadow, like down here, it's going to be kind of weird unless I'm working in a monochrome setting, which is like where you just are using one color. Okay, so that shadow, yeah, you get the idea, but that's probably not what it's going to look like in real life, right? So let's try another way. So another way to create this shadow, color-wise, so we could also have done this wet and wet, but another way to do it color-wise is to, and this is usually what we think of based on like what we learned in elementary school, I think. And I'm going to do these all glaze-wise just because I think it illustrates it more clearly, but all of these techniques could use wet and wet. I just think glaze is a little bit cleaner. Okay, so maybe we're creating a little shape using this technique or whatever. Lightened it up a little bit over here. Okay, but when we think of like in elementary school, maybe you add gray to add some shadow. Okay, so let's go ahead and dry this puppy. Okay, so now that this is dry, maybe we can scooch in a little bit. Nope, that's as far as it's gonna go. Okay, so I have some gray mixed up here. It's a little purpley, but it'll do. Okay, and I am going to do it just like I did the last one. I'm going to put some color here on the dark edge. And the reason why I like to do the glaze with this is because you can still see the red underneath and it doesn't get like muddy in the mixed color. So I really like adding shadow as a glaze. So once the first layer is already dry, because I feel like it looks more true to what you're actually seeing in reality. Okay. So there we go. Both of these have dimension, but then when we go to add like the little shadow here, I just feel like this one looks a little bit more natural than when we do it with the same color, right? Okay, so So then we have some other options. Sometimes people will be, especially illustrators, will use like a specific color scheme with their paintings. So all of their shadows might have a really similar color. So I don't love using gray or black. There's also a color called neutral tint. Let me actually find that so I can show you. Nope, nope, that's Mars Black. Hold on, I promise. Oop. So this is neutral tint. It is a color that specifically lends itself to being a shadow color for a lot of different colors. So if you are feeling like you don't want to think about shadows too much, but you would like to incorporate them, neutral tint. This is by Daniel Smith. Might be a really great paint to add to your collection. A lot of artists will, as I was saying, so sometimes people will always use like Payne's Gray, or maybe they have a really stylized painting. So let's go ahead and make another circle and kind of show what that could look like, okay? All right. So here is our little circle. This one's a little bigger. It's growing up. Our little circle's growing up. Okay, let me mute this while I blow dry. Okay, so this is actually a great example of why I don't love to blow dry, if possible, because do you see that little bloom line? That's because when I was blow drying, it kind of pushed the paint into a puddle and it dried unevenly. So I can try to even that out with like a lightly damp brush. And it's going to be more amenable to it right now since we just blow dried that. Whereas if you came back tomorrow and tried to do it, it might be a little less agreeable. Okay, so that's fine. But let's say my thing is that I love to create like a purple shadow, and that's like the vibe of my work, let's just say. Oh, I'm really liking this color. Okay, so here, is this the shadow color that you would see? Not necessarily, but I do think it's very pretty, and it really complements that red in a very cool way. So usually you're going to see like cool colors here, and then warmer colors on the highlights. Okay, so here we have our nice purple. Okay, let's soften that up. Just, oh my gosh, my towel's on my lap, and now I'm just using my pants. Okay, and then a lot of times you'll see a highlight of yellow. So we'll actually talk about highlights in a second. So then maybe all our shadows are purple, so our shadow would be purple here. Okay. So while I think, I think this probably maybe looks a little bit more natural, I think this one is a lot more compelling. So I'm curious, like, what you guys are thinking. 1, 2, or 3. Which one is your vibe? And it really just depends on your style. And then I'm going to show you one more option, which is my favorite option. So I'm going to go ahead and make my circle and start blow drying and give you guys a chance to share which one is your favorite so far. So we're only just skimming the surface here. Okay. All right. I'm going to do my blow dryer, so hang on. Okay, so it's getting a little hot over here. I've actually like melted a little bit of my desk thing, and the paper has turned a little orange because I just really got that very dry. So, you know, I have a love-hate relationship with my heat gun. It's fine. Okay, so for this one, we're going to need a little bit of color theory knowledge. So when I look at a color wheel, I'm going to look at like this pink here, right? Okay, so my little dial is here on pink. And when we're putting in shadows, something that can bring items into the background is going to be its complementary color, or the color that's opposite it on the color wheel. And this seems really counterintuitive because if you mix opposite colors, it turns it kind of brown, if you know from elementary school, right? When we mix all our finger paints together, it turns brown. But when we're trying to create dimension, if we are preserving the part that's closest to us with our most vibrant color, so this without any mussing, this pink color, and then we use the opposite color, it will actually kind of blend that other color more into the background. It will mute it in a way that allows us to really focus on the part that's closest to us. And I love using this for shadows because it really plays up the parts that we want to see and brings the other part, it makes it have a lot of depth. And so this is something you might notice with a lot of illustration. Yeah, so let's get into it. So I'm going to use a green, like a lime green-ish. Okay. And I'm going to do my shadow here. Here, it looks kind of gross, right? It's like boogers. And I did a little bit of a cooler green than what's on there. Okay. So here, doing that. Okay. All right. So this to me is what I think looks most like what it would look like in real life. Like this one, I think just looks a little flat, but when you add that opposite color, it gives the depth that we're looking for. So let's see. And then the shadow, it might have like a little bit of that pink in it and a little bit of that green, just reflecting off the surface. It kind of depends what the backgrounds are. I'll just kind of get a little bit of both here. Okay. Oh, I'm kind of running out of room here, but all right. So this is my favorite, and I really like looking at, I really like using a limited palette. And so that way it does have this kind of stylized element because I only am using a specific amount of colors. But I really like using the contrasting colors from that palette to create my shadows. And something we might want to do is add like a little bit more of the light and dark of the ball color. So we can always blow dry this and add a little darkness, add a little, do a little lift to bring some color up. So there are lots of ways that we can go about creating shadow. Okay. Next, I'm going to talk a little bit about adding a highlight. So if you think about our sun source, I'm going to show you on this one. So we've used a dark, cooler color here. Whoop, a cooler color for our shadow, but we can also use a lighter color for our highlights. Okay, so I'm going to just add a little bit of yellow here, just to kind of give us like what would be happening, just the warmth of the sun. I'm still leaving this part pretty light if that's where the light is hitting. But goodness golly gracious, do you see that? Like, can you tell from the camera like how much that pops? So I love that. I think this is a really fun technique to use. It looks very otherworldly, I think. And then I'm going to actually blow dry this one and show you how I would deepen that shadow. And then we'll get into our mushroom. All right, so I might use a combination of, so I've already added the opposite color, and I'm gonna do a little bit of this where we take the color and further deepen it. So we're gonna have pretty dark over here. And using the opposite color in your, is a really great tool to have in your toolbox because it also, if you're finding that a color in your palette is like too vibrant, like maybe you have a neon green that you like, but it's like just too intense for the project that you're working on, you can always just add a little smidgy of pink or red, and it's going to kind of chill that color out a little bit. And that's a really nice tool to have because it really gives your palette a little bit even more versatility. Okay. So here I've added some darkness of that pink. Oh my God, I don't know why it's doing all the auto-focusing. Ah! I'm sorry, y'all. That is so annoying. Let me see if I can fix that. That's really obnoxious. Let's try. Okay, exit. Let's try that. Let's see if. Okay, that looks better. Cool. Okay, sorry about that. Still learning all my technology. I really appreciate you guys being my guinea pigs. Okay, so what do we think? Do we feel like we've got a good sense of what we got going on here? I might even use a little bit of yellow over here just to kind of lighten that up. And then we can get into our our mushroom. Okay, enough of that. Okay, so for our mushroom, we are going to we're going to do our stylized mushroom. So we're going to make a nice kind of fun, funky, like fall mushroom. So let's start with a base of like kind of a rusty orange. So I'm grabbing some of my Indian red, some of my bright red. If you have like a burnt sienna, now would be a great time to use that. I'm not really sure where mine is. Woo! I gotta sneeze. Oh, here, I found some burnt sienna, so I'm gonna grab a little bit of that. Okay, so I've got a cool little orange. It's nice and warm. Okay. All right, so for a mushroom, we're gonna start with a base layer. So we're gonna make our little mushroom cap. So you're gonna do kind of a semicircle, like a little, it's like an eye. Okay, we're gonna make this nice and juicy. You can keep it pretty light for now, okay? So lots of water, a little bit of paint. Got kind of an eyeball shape with rounded corners. And then while it's still wet, we're gonna make our stem here. Maybe you centered yours better than mine, who knows, probably. I was just so excited, I couldn't even stop. And we're just doing like a little, okay? Like, it's a little bit thinner at the top, a little bit thicker at the base. All right, and there we go. Now, once again, we're gonna just, for consistency's sake, we're gonna imagine that the sun is coming from here. So what we can do right now is we can drop in darker color on our mushroom on the back side, all right? So we're going to drop it here along this left side. The stem is going to be darker because the sun is coming from above. One thing I'm noticing is that my paint is kind of wiggling around because I haven't taped down my paper. And so it's falling to the edges of this painting. So that's why I'm kind of giving it a little death grip here so that I can really get in here. Okay, and then I'm using the lift technique to pull up some of that paint. So we have a nice bright spot right here where the sun is hitting it. Okay, so here we've done a little bit of that shading that we talked about at first. We've done some lifting that we really went into yesterday. And this is a really nice base layer to draw from as we are painting the rest of this. So we will either wait for this to dry or use our little dryer. For your sake, I'm going to use the dryer so we're not here all day. Okay, so now that that top layer is dry, I'm going to start adding a little bit more dimension to this with the same color, just so we have like a good idea, excuse me, of where our shape is going. So imagine that we're getting a little sneaky peek of the underside of this mushroom. So I'm going to add this kind of gentle slope under here. And then this is coming into the middle. So I'm going to just leave this whole area unpainted, and I'm going to do a glaze with our original color for the under the mushroom part. It's going to be darker. So here we're using our technique of adding a second layer of the same color to give a sense of depth and shadow. So there we go. Already it's starting to have a little shape, okay? We can go pretty dark under here. I'm going to keep it somewhat light so we've got some room to build. But this is pretty good. I might add a little bit more of a second layer down here. I'm going to do some of the dry brushing here to add that shadow because mushrooms have a lot of texture. We're going to actually talk about that tomorrow. But I love how this brush is giving. It is giving texture. So I'm using a pretty dry brush and just kind of skittering it across the page to get a nice textural element here. And I was careful to kind of keep this water barrier here so I don't have a big blah, blah, blah of paint come down into my mushroom stem. Alrighty, so then if we wanted to, we could do a little bit more here. Remember to just watch out for your water barrier. So I am leaving just a little bit of a gap. And then I'm going to do a nice soft transition here by getting water and coming to meet that shadow. Okay. I think I want just a little bit more down here. Okay. And I'm going to let that, I'm not going to blend it too much. Okay. It is starting to take shape. We will once again use our blow dryer to dry it and then apply our next layer where we start getting into the color and shadow, okay? The depth and shadow. All right, mute. Okie dokie, artichokes. So now we're going to add some gills to the underside of this. And once again, I think I lied when I said we were going to move on to the shadow. So I actually think I am going to do this in our same color. I really like to work with, especially for this kind of illustration look, I really like to work with the same color just to get a base layer. And it just, I don't know, I just like it. So here we are. So I'm kind of imagining that these are coming out from the center of our mushroom. Here we go. And don't overthink it. Just draw some lines. But they should all be kind of radiating out from the center of your mushroom. These are called gills, I found out last year. I just paint things. I don't know the names of them, but I thought that was pretty funny because it's like a fish. Okay. So to feel like nice and gilly. Okay. So I'm happy with that. And I'm actually going to start adding, and we are going to do our opposite color. So let's look here at our color dial, an orange. And so we've got a nice turquoise color. So you know what that means. We're going to use our phthalo turquoise, which is my favorite color. It's like I planned it. So I'm going to do some of that. And honestly, I would use these colors in stylized pieces anyway. So what I'm going to do is I am going to create a soft shadow here along the base of my mushroom. Okay. And so you can see, because we have orange underneath, it's not as bright as it usually would be. Like this, compare it to this. This is the same color, but because we're applying it over the orange, it has this nice muted feel, but it still has that flavor of the phthalo turquoise that I love. Okay. Enough of that. And we're actually going to get a nice shadow too from the cap of the mushroom. And this is going to be probably a harsher shadow, but I'm just doing the soft shadows right now. So I love this little mushroom. Mushy. I might even add, I want this to be pretty aggressive here. I love how we can see the texture. Maybe we're adding a little texture here. Great. Okay. So we're going to hang out here. Then we're going to do it on the top as well. So this is going to be a little bit less pronounced because the top is getting some sun. So this is mostly going to be just at this kind of bottom corner and right here on the rim. And then I'm just going to do like a nice kind of dry brush fade out for this. I don't want this to be super pronounced. I want to have a lot of control because this is actually a smoother part of the mushroom, the cap. And so I want the cap to remain smooth. Like I'm a little bit down with the brushiness down here, but for the cap of the mushroom, I really want to keep that smooth, rounded look. So I'm just doing like a nice gentle fade here. Okay. All right. It is taking shape. Now you can imagine it's probably pretty dark under here as well. I want to blow dry this really quickly in between because I don't want to mess with our water barrier. Okay. So hang on to your hats. Oh, geez. Sorry. Okie dokie. So now, because we're looking at the underside of the mushroom, this part is actually going to be quite dark. And I'm just going to go in with this turquoise. I love that we can see the color of the mushroom through the ridges of the paint. So we still see that orange, but like the turquoise is really popping off right here. Okay. I think that's what the kids say. Popping off. I don't know. It might mean something totally not what I mean, but it's cool. It's popping. Just like my lip gloss. My lip gloss is popping. My lip gloss is cool. That's not what the kids say. They don't know about our lip gloss popping. Anyone under 30 watching this is probably like, WTF. Okay. All right. Here we go. Here we go. And now we are getting somewhere. Okay. I want it to be nice and dark under this middle part. So I'm just dropping in some nice color. And you might be like, this still looks kind of weird. That's because if our sun is coming here, we're going to actually have a very harsh shadow line coming from the curvature of this mushroom. It's going to go right here. So let's do it. Okay. And this one is going to be like, I'm not blending this baby out. This one is going to stay right there. Okay. All right. Has a little bit of a curve of the mushroom cap. Make it a little bit darker up here because that's where it's getting very, very little sun. Okay. There we go. So we've got a little bit of shadow happening up here. We've got a lot of shadow happening underneath our mushroom. And we've got this really nice hard shadow here. And then I think, so this is probably in some grass. So let's think about some grass. What do you think? All right, do some green, a little blue in there. Okay. A little bit, just give it a little fancy flair. Okay. But you know this baby's casting a shadow. Okay. So, hi, Elle. Good to see you. Okay, so let's look on here. What shadow are we casting? So we're doing a pretty classic green, red. Okay, so let's find kind of like a nice dark staunch red. Okay, and I'm just going to add this wet and wet here. I'm going to fuss with it until it gets in the kind of like brown category. Okay. Because I like that this is a little bit more mixy because it's our background here. Getting a little bit of that into like around the base here. And I'm just going to even like just do some wet and wet right there. I'm going to add some green here. Add a little bit of that green to the wet and wet. I'm leaving a little bit of a line here because I don't want that dark shadow to be in that part. Okay. I'm probably going to add a little bit of a second layer to this once it's dry. I might add a little bit more green in here so it's not like totally red. I like that. I like what we got going on here. Okay. Now, how are we doing? Feeling good? Okay, so we can also add some more depth in these gills by digging into the shadow a little bit more if we want. Okay, so I'm just going to do it like, oh God, it's not dry. It's not dry. It's okay. Yeah, so make sure yours is dry, but I'm just going along the inner parts of the gills. And if I were doing this for real, like for a professional painting, I would definitely one, make sure that's dry, but two, be using a much smaller brush and really going into that in a nitty-gritty manner. Okay, so we've added our shadow, but now let's add some highlights, okay? So I'm going to use a yellow, just because that feels like really warm and sunny. I really like the play of the blue and the orange and the yellow. Okay, so I don't want to do it on the brightest bright of this part, but kind of all around. All right. So I'm adding a little bit of paint, and I'm going to use water to soften that edge line. And I'm sticking away from our main highlight spot. You know I'm using New Gamboge because we love it. Okay. And then we might be getting like a little bit of that yellow, just kind of like just a touch of it down there. Okay, and definitely let's add some in here into our grass, okay, just for funsies. Give it a deeper contrast from there. Okay, so Elle says, as a kid, I remember mixing tempera powder paints in elementary school. And of course, my go-to was my coloring book. I love that. Oh my gosh, I love hearing about like little baby artist you. Okay, so what do we think? Should we put some little like dots on it? I feel like I want to do like some fire engine dots. Is that too weird? I'm going to do it. Just deal with it. Okay, I'm going to blow dry really quick. We can add. Okay. I really like this red color mix, this kind of vermilion mixed with our phthalo turquoise. This isn't really vermilion, but here, let me add a little yellow to that. I really got to restock my palette. I'm running low. Oh my God, how cute is this? There is this young boy, I can't remember what his name is, but he does these like I think on Instagram videos, and he's just this little boy with this like super blonde curly hair, and he is foraging mushrooms with his dad, and he gives like all these little hunting lessons on how to like look for the mushrooms and stuff. So it's like the cutest thing I've ever seen in my life, and I'm obsessed with him. He's adorable. Also, I would never trust myself to just go looking for mushrooms. Okay. Okay, is this like a realistic looking mushroom with this? Probably not, but I really like the polka dots that I added. So as your painting, if you're like, that looks weird, Kate, then don't add the polka dots. But here we have used so many different techniques. So as we applied the mushroom, we did some light shading with our wet and wet by adding a little bit more paint in here and lifting over here. We used the use of the opposite color to add some depth to our shadow areas. We used soft shadows. We used hard shadows. We thought about our light source. Like mushrooms are such a great little thing to work with because they're so sweet. They're so simple, but there is a lot of dynamic shaping happening. Excuse me. Oh my goodness. So I think that is a really great intro to shading and shadows. So let me know if you have any other questions. I'm going to just do a couple quick housekeeping announcements. Thank you so much for painting with me today. If you're coming in for the replay and you haven't joined the Fall for Watercolor Challenge, please go follow the link in the description below. It comes with the chance to win prizes. Anything you tag will be entered to win for the giveaway that I'm doing at the end of the month. I'd actually love to hear from you all here in the live. I was thinking about doing like a live painting party on Halloween at some point in time. So if you want to pop in and let me know what time zone you're in and what time that day would be good. Maybe we would do it on the 30th. I don't know when folks' kids are trick-or-treating or whatever. But just let me know what a good time would be and what time zone you're in, and I'll try to like take that into account. Because I think it would be really fun to paint with you like in a Zoom where we can all see each other's faces. Anyway, thank you so much. I had so much fun painting with you all today. And don't forget, if you do this exercise, please, please, please tag me so I can see your beautiful artwork. I love seeing all the things that you've created. So see you again tomorrow where we are talking about, oh my God, what are we talking about? I think we're talking about moss. I just lost the page, but I think we're talking about texture, like dry texture and how to add texture to your page. And we're talking about moss, I believe. So, alrighty. Okay, so BS says mountain time and they'll be trick-or-treating on the 31st. So maybe we'll do it on the 30th. That sounds good. Or the first. We could be like, oh, thank goodness. We did it. Fall for watercolor is over. Let's have a party. Maybe we could do like a holiday painting. Anyway, so let me know. Boop, boop, boop. I will talk to you later. Have a wonderful day. Happy painting. Bye.